The floorboard groaned beneath my foot, but no one seemed to notice. I stood just outside the study, my hand halfway to the door to knock when I overheard my father's voice, calm, dismissive, almost as if reading a shopping list. "Your sister, she doesn't deserve a penny. She's out." I froze. My breath halted. The sound of my heart pounding was all I could hear. Inside, Alina didn't argue. There was no hesitation. Then I heard Mom, Diane, hum softly, a sound of satisfaction. I took a small step back, just enough to peer through the gap between the door and its frame. Diane was perched on the edge of the leather sofa, a cup of tea in her hand, her lips twisted into that tight, knowing smile she wore whenever everything fell into place. She looked calm, serene, as if cutting me off wasn't cruel but inevitable. I shut my eyes and stepped away before they could see me. The climb upstairs felt longer than it should have. My feet were light, yet my limbs felt heavy. I didn't cry. Not then. Not ever for them. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and opened my laptop. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts. Passwords, codes, texts to verify. Within minutes, everything I owned was transferred to an account they didn't know about, one they would never find. They thought I'd stay frozen in that hallway, too shocked to move. They thought I would keep playing the helpful, invisible, safe role. What they didn't realize was that I'd had suspicions for weeks. The ignored invitations, the forced smiles, the estate papers that never reached my inbox. What they didn't know was that I was aware of Grandma's second trust. The one they tried to erase. The one that matured 2 weeks ago. I gently closed the laptop, walked over to the dresser, and unlocked the top drawer hidden under old scarves and a picture of Eunice. There it was, a scrap of paper in her handwriting with only one name on it. Mine. It didn't begin with the trust. It began smaller. My name missing from a family group chat about Thanksgiving plans. A family picture posted on Diane's social media, cropped just before my shoulder. A dinner where Alina made a toast to family, her gaze completely skipping over me. I convinced myself it was just grief. People act strangely after a loss. Maybe I had become a ghost in their house because it reminded them too much of Grandma. Once, I even apologized aloud for being too much. No one corrected me. Looking back, I see it now for what it was. A slow, deliberate unraveling of my place at the table. One polite omission at a time. Alina had always been their favorite. Not because she asked for it, but because she wore it as if it were made just for her. She knew how to lean in when Diane spoke of legacy. She understood Dad's business tone before she ever had a job. She was the one they showcased at events, the one who got the room with the view and a seat near the will. And I was the quiet one. The one who helped Grandma balance her checkbook when the tremors in her hands grew too strong. The one who wrote thank you notes Diane couldn't be bothered with. The one who kept everything together, so they could pretend nothing was falling apart. I had told myself that being good would be enough, but Alina was always ahead. And Diane played the long game. That smile I saw yesterday, it wasn't new. I had seen it before at Christmas, when I showed up with gifts only to find the dinner moved during Grandma's funeral. When I gave the eulogy and no one applauded but Diane said, "That was brave." I just hadn't known what I was looking at until now. I unfolded the slip of paper from Eunice's drawer and read it again. The ink was still fresh despite the months. There was an address, a name, and a key taped behind it. The key fit perfectly into the lock under Eunice's old sewing desk. I hadn't touched that drawer in years. Grandma used to joke that it held memories better left folded. But when I opened it, the contents didn't feel like memories. They felt like instructions. Inside were 3 items. First, a legal envelope, heavy and embossed, marked Amendment to Last Will and Testament. I recognized the notary's seal, the witness signatures, the date, just 1 month before Eunice passed. My name was printed clearly on every page. My name, and only mine. The second was a voice recorder. I pressed play with hands steadier than they should have been. Her voice filled the quiet, soft but sure. "If they try to twist this, Leora, show them this tape. I trust you. Only you." It wasn't long, only 23 seconds, but it said more than Diane had said to me in years. The third was a note. 4 lines in Eunice's sharp handwriting, slanted from years of ledger work. "Blood doesn't make them worthy. If you're reading this, they've already turned on you. Take what's yours. Don't look back. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the words until they blurred. Not from tears, but from understanding. She knew. Not just about the money, but about them. How they would twist legacy into leverage. How they would dress up erasure in polite tones and legal jargon. She knew they would weaponize tradition and make me feel like the one who failed to fit in. And still she gave me this. Not just the will, but the clarity, the voice, the proof. I packed the envelope, the note, the recorder, and every detail of her final move, slipping them into my bag. By morning, I wouldn't be asking for a place at the table anymore. I was going to lay the truth right on it. The kitchen was alive with sound when I walked in. Alina was perched at the edge of the island, coffee in hand, legs crossed, as though she had already secured her victory. Dad flipped through printed spreadsheets, his reading glasses low on his nose. Diane stirred oatmeal at the stove, humming a tune that made it feel like another typical morning for a family like ours. None of them acknowledged me as I entered. I pulled the manila envelope from my bag and laid it flat on the counter between the croissants and the legal pads. Alina noticed first. Her gaze moved from my face to the envelope and then narrowed. "What's this?" she asked, her tone more reflex than inquiry. Dad didn't look up. "We're in the middle of something, Leora. Could this wait?" "No," I replied simply. I nudged the envelope closer to him. "You'll want to read this." Diane turned, still holding the wooden spoon, and glanced at the seal. Her smile faltered, just barely. Alina scoffed. "Seriously, you brought your own paperwork? Is this another attempt to insert yourself?" I didn't respond. I simply opened the flap, pulled out the will amendment, unfolded it slowly, and placed it between them like a card in the final round of a game they thought I wasn't playing. "Signed, witnessed, dated," I said, tapping the signature line with my finger. "You remember Beverly, right? Grandma's friend from the garden club. She was there. So was the notary." Dad's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. Diane remained silent, but her wooden spoon shook in her hand. Alina reached for the paper as if she could deny its existence, but I blocked her hand with mine. "Don't," I said, my voice low. "You already knew what you were doing. Don't act surprised now." For the first time in years, the room fell into a heavy silence, not just quiet but hollow. The kind of silence that only happens when the truth rips the roof off a lie. I left the papers there and walked to the sink, filling a glass with water. No one moved. They didn't need to. The damage had already been done, and I hadn't even played the recording yet. "You've crossed a line," Diane said, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "This isn't what your grandmother wanted." I met her eyes without blinking. "You're right," I replied. "She wanted honesty. She left that to me." Alina laughed, the sound harsh and empty. "This is spiteful. You always hated being in the background, and now you're turning her death into a spectacle." "I stayed quiet for years," I said. "You mistook that as obedience." Dad opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could twist the story. I pulled the small recorder from my pocket, gently placed it on the table, and pressed play. Anya's voice filled the room, thin, worn but resolute. "If they try to twist this, Leora, show them this tape. I trust you. Only you." No one spoke when it finished. Diane stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. Alina stared at her coffee like it might give her an escape. I reached into my folder and slid another envelope across the counter. "Filed this morning," I said. "An injunction to freeze the estate until everything is reviewed." Dad's jaw clenched. "You're trying to tear this family apart." "No," I answered calmly. "I'm just refusing to let it tear me apart." I gathered the papers, slipped them back into my bag, and walked toward the door. No shouting, no final words, just the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood. Let them sit in the silence. Let them wonder what else I had in store. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and saw a text waiting. "Injunction accepted. Funds are frozen pending review. You're in control of next steps." I gazed at the screen for a few more moments, then switched off the recorder in my hand. I wasn't merely their daughter anymore. I had become the executor of the truth. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor of Maddox and Langley. The receptionist glanced up, startled, before swiftly rising as I passed by. I didn't stop. I walked straight into the boardroom, where 5 senior partners were already seated, discussing financial projections and the Q3 forecasts. The conversation halted the moment they noticed me. Leora Thomas, the senior partner, narrowed her eyes. "We weren't expecting you," she remarked. "Now I am," I replied, placing a folder on the gleaming table. "As of last week, I hold the controlling interest in this firm. 51% has been assigned through the trust by Unionism Maddox, and is now upheld by a notarized amendment. All the documentation is in there." Alina was already seated. Her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were pale. "This is a stunt," she snapped. "No," I replied, sitting at the head of the table. "This is succession." The room remained still until the door slammed open. Ray stormed in, breathing heavily, his face flushed. "This is outrageous," he exclaimed. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, calmly opening a second folder. "And I will. Starting with transparency." I handed out copies of internal transaction reports, the very ones the previous accounting team had conveniently concealed. "Page 3, I said. "Chase Maddox used corporate funds to cover personal gambling losses. Over $80,000 in so-called client entertainment expenses that were routed directly to his personal Venmo." Ray opened his mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. "And page 5, your LLC Blue Ridge Advisory is listed as a vendor to the firm, even though it doesn't provide any consulting. Instead, it launders distributions from the estate through inflated invoices. It's all there, bank transfers, timestamps, even the shell corporation in the Caymans." Alina sprang to her feet so suddenly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You've been spying on your own family?" she demanded. I met her gaze directly. "I've been protecting what remains of Grandma's name." Thomas cleared his throat, glancing through the documents. "We weren't made aware of any of this." "You are now," I replied. Ray glared at me across the table, but this time, it wasn't with anger. It was something smaller, something unraveling. I didn't flinch because the nameplate in front of me no longer said guest. It now read managing partner. The report arrived at dawn, 112 pages of corruption, all cloaked in professional jargon and pristine formatting. The forensic team had gone through 6 years of records. What they found didn't surprise me, it only confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't simply tried to cut me out. They'd been draining the foundation dry the entire time. A 6-figure string of consulting fees was traced back to an account in Alina's name, an account she opened shortly after Grandma's first hospitalization. Dozens of fake invoices billed to departments that never existed. Equipment rentals that were never delivered. Shell companies registered to P.O. boxes in Florida, Delaware, and Zurich. And then the final piece. An offshore account linked directly to Diane, quietly set up under a holding firm with no physical office. The lead investigator didn't even seem surprised when he handed me the summary. "You've got enough to file," he said. "Criminal and civil." I nodded once, then forwarded the entire report to the legal team with a single line in the email. "Proceed fully." By late morning, my attorney called. "We can file the charges today, but you need to be certain. This will be public." Loud. "I am," I said. "This isn't about revenge. It's about respect for Grandma, for what she built, for what they were supposed to protect." He paused for a moment, then replied, "Understood. We'll initiate proceedings this afternoon." I hung up the phone and gazed out the office window below. The city carried on indifferent. People walked to coffee shops, checked their watches, unlocked their doors. That's the part they never understood. I didn't need to win to feel whole. I just needed the lies to end. The report lay open beside me, page after page. I highlighted sections and left notes for the compliance team. I didn't flinch when I reached the numbers tied to my father's retirement fund. I didn't hesitate when Alina's signature appeared on forged contracts. Because healing isn't about staying silent. It's about telling the truth out loud, on the record, with your name signed at the bottom. And my name wasn't going away. It was just beginning to mean something again. The message arrived shortly after noon. A simple text. I didn't answer. I just showed up. The garden behind St. All felt almost too silent. The same bench where Unionist had sat during choir practice. The same flower beds Diane had once feigned interest in. She'd tucked her phone behind her sunglasses, whispering to the estate planner as she pruned the roses. She was already there when I arrived, wearing crisp white, not a wrinkle in sight. She glanced up as I approached, patting the bench beside her. I didn't sit. I have to give you credit, she said softly, folding her hands in her lap. I underestimated you. That was your first mistake, I replied. But not your last. You think this is about power, she continued, her voice calm, unaffected. I kept this family together, Leora. Every time your father stumbled, I held things steady. Every time Alina broke down, I picked her up. You were always the unpredictable one. You wanted the truth, but didn't care what it cost. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You didn't keep anything together. You controlled it. There's a difference. Her eyes met mine, a brief flicker. Grief? No, just calculation. Everything falls apart, she whispered. Even the truth. You'll see. It starts slow, and then it's all at once. I studied her face. The calm was still there, but the certainty was cracked. She stood, smoothing her dress as though the conversation had gone just as planned. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I do expect consequences. I didn't reply. Not a word, not a nod. I turned and walked down the stone path, leaving her there, silent. She didn't follow. Back at the office, I signed the final documents to release the testimony. Every asset, every dollar, every name, and the courtroom date were already marked on the calendar. The courtroom didn't feel cold, but the air was heavy, every breath feeling like it took more effort. I took the stand, swore my name under oath, and opened the folder I had prepared in silence for months. I started with the basics: dates, discrepancies, names tied to transfers they thought would never be traced. I spoke calmly, without embellishment or drama, just facts. Then I played the recording, Onionist's voice clear and firm, filling the room. If they try to twist this, Leora, you show them this tape. I trust you. Only you. The judge nodded slightly, saying nothing. I handed over Grandma's handwritten letter, her signature, her ink, for lines that shattered every defense they'd built. Next, Alina took the stand. Her voice was controlled, rehearsed. We were protecting the family legacy, she said. We didn't want conflict. We wanted harmony. Leora was unstable. She wouldn't have known what to do with the responsibility. I didn't look at her while she spoke. I looked at the judge when it was my turn again. I said it quietly but firmly. Erasing someone isn't protection. It's cowardice in silk. Alina flinched. Diane looked away. I finished with a final statement. This isn't about inheritance. It's about rewriting the story. I'm not unstable. I'm not dramatic. I was inconvenient to their version of events, and now I'm here to correct it. The judge paused, then spoke. The amended will stands. Full control of the estate remains with Ms. Leora Maddox. Any misuse of funds by Ms. Alina Maddox and Mr. Ray Maddox will be referred for further legal action. Ms. Diane Maddox is permanently removed from any fiduciary authority related to the trust. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Outside, I walked past the reporters without saying a word. Back in the car, I pulled out the small journal Onionist had left behind and flipped to the dog-eared page. The one that simply said, "Truth doesn't scream. It stands." And now so did I. The lake house was still once more. No lawyers. No files. No courtroom echoes. Just the sound of water lapping against the dock and wind rustling through the trees Onionist had planted long before any of us had anything to fight for. I took off my shoes at the door and walked down the narrow hall to her old reading room. I sat in the chair she used every morning, coffee in one hand, pen in the other. The journal was still there, exactly where I had left it. Brown leather, worn edges, her handwriting on every page, steady and deliberate. I flipped to the page I'd marked before the trial. The ink had faded a little, but the words still rang louder than anything Alina or Diane had said in months. Sometimes blood must be drained for a body to heal. I read it again, but this time not with grief, with understanding. They tried to rewrite the story. They tried to erase me. They said I was too emotional, too dramatic, too difficult. But all they did was clear the path for me. They handed me the pieces. I just chose to build instead of break. I stood by the window and watched the light shift across the water. They tried to bury me, I said aloud, my voice steady. But they handed me the shovel. I didn't dig a grave. I planted something. And when I turned toward the hallway, I locked the door behind me, not to shut them out, not in anger, but to mark a line. This was where their version ended, and mine began.